Welcome back. It is 9:23. You're watching Breakfast Television. Well, as we mentioned last week, China has now formally charged Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig with spying more than 18 months after the Canadians were first detained. We are now joined by Kevin Garrett, who was detained in China for 2 years, and he can speak a little bit more about his experience in prison and what these two Michaels might be going through. Good morning, Kevin. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Mary. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Thank you for joining us. So what was your reaction when you first heard that Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor were being formally charged last week?
Well, when I first heard it, just brought back memories of what happened to me when I was formally charged, and that was about 3 months before my trial. And it was just, I was really shocked and incredibly saddened for them and for their families, because now it means for sure they're going to trial. And in China, they have a 99.9% conviction rate. So there's still hope for them, of course, but I was just very, very much saddened for them and what they have to go through now.
So you were detained in China for over 2 years, and you were accused of spying and stealing military secrets, similar to what the two Michaels are facing. What were your conditions like in prison?
The conditions in prison, I spent 19 months in prison and 6 months before that in what they called residential surveillance, which means isolation and interrogation. 14 people in my cell in the prison, food only about 70% of the time. Your very small cell with the 14 of us, just really wooden beds together. The bathroom is a glass-walled enclosure, so everything's visible. The smell, of course, is not the greatest. You're only let outside occasionally into a cage that's attached to the cell. Every kind of crime passed through my cell. Persons from petty theft to murder to drug crimes, a lot of that. And it's not the nicest environment by any means. And you never leave the cell. Mm-hmm.
Wow. So 14 people in one cell. How big of a cell are we talking here?
Well, big enough for 14 beds and a small aisle down the middle. So there's 7 on each side, and there's no other room except for the bathroom, and so there's absolutely no privacy. And I mean, the good thing about it was I could talk to other people. I could talk to the other inmates there. In the isolation, of course, I couldn't. I was, had really no contact. The only time I left the cell was a couple times for medical reasons. And then also when the embassy came, which was only once a month for 30 minutes. And unfortunately, the two Michaels are being denied embassy visits right now. So they haven't seen a consular official for over 5 months now, which is really horrible.
Yeah, and Chinese officials are blaming COVID for that reason. That's nice that you were able to talk to the other inmates, though. What other sort of things did you do to pass the time? Well,
for me, it was really almost like a very long-term seminary. I spent a lot of time just reading and praying because being a Christian, that's what kept me going. God just really answered in those times. He really proved himself who he was. And, I would talk to the other inmates, just general chit-chat. And sometimes they'd ask about my faith, sometimes they wouldn't. But that's what kept me going. So I had routines that I established in prison, and that was very, very helpful. Mm-hmm.
So we know both Michaels have endured day-long interrogations, no access to lawyers or families. If you had a chance to speak to either of the two Michaels, what would you say to them?
I would say you hold on to hope. I held on to hope, first of all, that the Canadian government would do something, and I believe they did. But I held on to the hope that God would free me and that God would keep me. So that made the huge difference to me. And the consular visits were a big hope to me because they brought hope. And the one consular official, I won't mention, but she said something every time she saw me when she was leaving. She says, "I hope I don't see you again." And she meant, I hope this is over before I have to come back again. Little things like that were incredibly encouraging to me. And, the messages, of course, from family and people that were able to send messages to me were incredibly encouraging. So you hold on to that hope. You never give up.
Looking back on your experience, what lasting effects did this have on you?
Well, of course, it definitely affects you. I don't have nightmares. I don't have anything like that. but things like what's happening to little Michaels trigger everything again. I can remember the smell. I remember the horrible conditions. I remember the loneliness. I remember the anguish, really the agony, the pain, the physical pain issues. I remember all those things very clearly. And I think it sounds like I might have lost you there. I remember all those things that happened, and they're not pleasant memories, although some are okay. Mm-hmm.
We can still hear you, but you were frozen there for a second. And just to wrap it up real quick here, Kevin, you wrote a book about your experience in prison, Two Tears on the Window. And that basically talks about your entire time in prison when you were falsely charged.
Yeah, I happen to have a copy with me. It's got Two Tears on the Window. You go to the website, twotearsonthewindow.com. You can see that. Of course, it's available on Amazon and Kobo, Kindle, things like that. But it details far more than we can in a few minutes here about the horrible conditions, but about the hope in God that kept me going, and the many people involved around the world praying and writing letters. And I encourage people to write letters to the government to encourage them to move harder, to stand firmer with China, and to keep pushing for their release. That's really what helped me as well. But I didn't know a lot of that until I left China. And that was not quite 4 years ago now.
Kevin, thank you so much for your time this morning. It was great to have you.
Thank you. Very glad to share. Thank you. Bless you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. It is 9:29.